Have you ever wondered what would happen if the US dollar, the world's reserve currency, just collapsed overnight? It sounds like the plot of a disaster movie, right? But let's actually unpack this scenario. What would a world without a stable dollar really look like? First, let's be clear. A complete overnight collapse is extremely unlikely. The global financial system is deeply intertwined with the dollar. But for the sake of this thought experiment, let's imagine we wake up tomorrow and the dollar is essentially worthless. The first thing you'd notice is chaos. Your life savings in the bank? Gone. Vanished. The numbers are still there on the screen, but they can't buy you a loaf of bread. This isn't just a problem for the rich, it's a catastrophe for everyone. Your paycheck, your retirement fund, all of it suddenly has no value. This triggers immediate, widespread panic. People would rush to ATMs to pull out whatever cash they can, but the machines would run dry in minutes. Even if you got some cash, stores would instantly stop accepting it. Why would they trade real goods for worthless paper? We'd see massive lines at grocery stores, gas stations, and pharmacies as people scramble to trade anything they have for essential supplies. Bartering would become the new norm almost instantly. Got a spare generator? Maybe you can trade it for a month's worth of canned food. It would be a return to a pre-monetary society, and it would be brutal. On a national level, the US government would be paralyzed. It can't pay its employees, its soldiers, or fund any of its services because its tax revenue, all in dollars, is now worthless. The entire structure of society would start to break down. Without a functioning government to maintain order, local communities would be on their own. Now let's zoom out to the global stage. It would be an absolute economic apocalypse. Most international trade is conducted in dollars. Countries hold massive reserves of US dollars. All of that would be wiped out. Trillions of dollars in global wealth, gone. Oil, grain, electronics, the entire global supply chain would grind to a halt. Countries that export goods to the US would see their biggest market disappear, causing their own economies to crater. This would lead to unprecedented geopolitical instability. Alliances built on economic ties would shatter. Countries would scramble to secure resources. And without the established financial system, this could easily lead to conflicts. Who would be the new global power? Perhaps a country with vast gold reserves or a stable alternative currency, like the euro or the yuan, but even they would be reeling from the shockwave. The transition would be anything but smooth. So what would rise from the ashes? In the US, the government would have to act fast. The most likely scenario is the creation of a new dollar, probably backed by a hard asset like gold. This is often called a currency reset. They would essentially say, the old dollar is dead, here is the new one, and one new dollar is worth, say, 1/50th of an ounce of gold. This would stabilize the economy, but it would be a painful process. People who held onto old dollars would lose everything, while those who had tangible assets like gold, silver, real estate, or even practical skills would be in a much better position. Your day-to-day life would change dramatically. The era of cheap imported goods would be over. We'd have to start producing almost everything we need right here at home. This would create jobs, sure, but it would also mean a much lower standard of living for a long time. Your iPhone, your car, your clothes, everything would become incredibly expensive or simply unavailable. Now let's pull back from this doomsday scenario. Is this actually going to happen? The chances are incredibly low. While the US dollar does face challenges like national debt and inflation, its position is incredibly entrenched. There is no viable alternative right now that could replace it on a global scale. The entire world has a vested interest in keeping the dollar stable. A collapse would hurt everyone, not just the United States. However, this thought experiment is a powerful reminder of what money truly is, a shared belief. Its value comes from our collective trust in it. It also highlights the importance of being financially resilient. Diversifying your assets is key. This doesn't just mean stocks and bonds. It means having tangible assets, valuable skills, and a strong community. In a true crisis, it's not the numbers in your bank account that matter, but your ability to adapt and provide real value. Thinking about scenarios like this isn't about fear-mongering. It's about being prepared and understanding the systems that govern our world. It encourages us to think critically about our finances and to build a life that's resilient no matter what the future holds. A total collapse is a movie plot, but economic shifts are real. Being educated and prepared is your best defense against any storm. But how did the dollar get this superpower status? Was it always this way? The story is fascinating, full of power plays, pivotal moments, and a bit of luck. It's a journey that takes us back through world wars, economic crises, and groundbreaking agreements that reshape the entire global financial system. Let's rewind to the late 19th century. The world was largely on the gold standard. This was a simple, elegant system. A country's currency was directly linked to a specific amount of gold. You could literally walk into a bank with your paper money and exchange it for physical gold. This created stability and trust. The British pound sterling was the top dog back then, thanks to the vast British Empire and London's role as the center of global finance. The US dollar was just a regional player, not really on the international stage, but things were about to change dramatically. World War I broke out in 1914, and it was a cataclysmic event that shattered the old world order. European nations, engulfed in the conflict, had to print massive amounts of money to fund their war efforts. This made it impossible for them to stick to the gold standard. They suspended it and their currencies became unstable. The United States, however, stayed out of the war for the first few years. While Europe was tearing itself apart, America was becoming the world's factory and bank. It supplied food, weapons, and loans to the warring nations, particularly the Allies. And how were they paid? In gold. A massive river of gold flowed from Europe across the Atlantic and into the vaults of the US Treasury. By the end of the war, the US held the majority of the world's monetary gold. This was a monumental shift in economic power. The old financial centers of Europe were drained and in debt, while the US emerged from the war richer, stronger, and holding the ultimate asset, gold. The dollar was now not just backed by gold, it was backed by the largest hoard of gold the world had ever seen. This laid the first crucial foundation for the dollar's future dominance. After the chaos of World War I and the Great Depression, the world was desperate for a new, stable financial system. As World War II drew to a close in 1944, leaders from 44 Allied nations gathered in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. Their goal was to create a framework for post-war economic cooperation and prevent the kind of economic warfare that had contributed to the conflict. This meeting, the Bretton Woods Conference, would change everything. The British, led by economist John Maynard Keynes, proposed a new global currency called the Bancor. But the Americans, led by Harry Dexter White, had a different idea. Given that the US held about 2/3 of the world's gold and had the strongest economy, they proposed a system centered around the US dollar. The American plan won. The Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, and it established a new world order. Here is how it worked. The US dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Then all other major currencies were pegged to the US dollar at fixed exchange rates. In essence, the dollar became the new anchor of the global financial system, with the implicit promise that it was as good as gold. Foreign central banks could, in theory, exchange their dollars for gold from the US Treasury. This system also created two major institutions you've definitely heard of, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to ensure exchange rate stability, and the World Bank, to provide loans for post-war reconstruction. The Bretton Woods system officially crowned the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. Every country needed to hold dollars to trade, to stabilize their own currency, and as a store of value. The dollar's reign had officially begun. For the next quarter century, the Bretton Woods system worked pretty well. It ushered in an era of unprecedented global economic growth, often called the Golden Age of capitalism. International trade boomed, and the world economy was relatively stable. Countries held vast reserves of dollars, and the demand for American currency was insatiable. But cracks began to appear in the system. the US was spending enormous amounts of money abroad, particularly on the Vietnam War and social programs at home. This meant more and more dollars were flowing out of the country. Foreign nations, especially France, started getting nervous. They saw the US printing more dollars than it could realistically back with its gold reserves. So they started calling America's bluff. They began showing up with their dollars and demanding gold in return, as was their right under the Bretton Woods Agreement. The US gold reserves started to dwindle at an alarming rate. It became clear that the US could not honor its promise to convert all foreign-held dollars into gold at $35 an ounce. The system was on the verge of collapse. So on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. In a move that became known as the Nixon Shock, he unilaterally suspended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. This single act effectively killed the Bretton Woods system. The world was suddenly thrown into a new, uncertain era of floating exchange rates, where currency values were determined by supply and demand in the open market. You would think this would be the end of the dollar's dominance, right? If it's not backed by gold anymore, why should anyone trust it? But what happened next was perhaps the most brilliant geopolitical and economic maneuver in modern history. With the gold link gone, the dollar needed a new anchor to maintain its global supremacy. And the US found one in a very different kind of liquid gold: oil. In the early 1970s, the world was reeling from the 1973 oil crisis, when OPEC nations imposed an embargo and oil prices quadrupled. The US government, led by Henry Kissinger, secretly negotiated a landmark deal with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer and the de facto leader of OPEC. The deal was simple but ingenious. The US would provide military aid and protection to Saudi Arabia. In return, Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil exports exclusively in US dollars. And crucially, they would invest their surplus oil profits back into US government debt securities. Other OPEC countries soon followed suit. This created the petrodollar system. Suddenly, any country that wanted to buy oil, which was basically every country, had to first acquire US dollars. This created a massive, constant, and artificial demand for the dollar from all corners of the globe. It didn't matter that the dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore. It was now backed by the world's most essential commodity. This petrodollar recycling system ensured that the dollar remained the world's reserve currency. It was a masterstroke that locked in the dollar's dominance for decades to come, even after the collapse of Bretton Woods. The world needed dollars not for gold, but for energy, the lifeblood of the modern economy. So, where does that leave us today? The dollar's dominance is still incredibly strong, built on the foundations we've discussed. First, there's simple inertia. The global financial system is built around the dollar. Commodities are priced in it, international loans are issued in it, and central banks hold it in their reserves. Changing this would be like trying to change the language of the internet from English overnight. It's incredibly difficult and costly. Second, the US has the largest and most liquid financial markets in the world. When you have billions of dollars, you need a place where you can park and move that money easily and safely. And US Treasury bonds are considered the world's safest asset, the ultimate safe haven in times of crisis. When a crisis hits anywhere in the world, investors don't flee the dollar, they flee to the dollar, which ironically makes it even stronger. However, the dollar's throne is not entirely secure. In recent years, there's been growing talk of de-dollarization. Countries like China and Russia are actively trying to reduce their reliance on the dollar. They're conducting more trade in their own currencies and building alternative payment systems. The rise of China's economy is a huge factor. The yuan is slowly but surely gaining more international traction. We're also seeing the emergence of digital currencies and other potential alternatives. The US's use of financial sanctions has also pushed some countries to seek alternatives to a dollar system that can be weaponized. Will the dollar be dethroned anytime soon? Probably not. The alternatives simply don't offer the same level of trust, stability, and market depth. But the global financial landscape is definitely shifting. We might be moving from a world dominated by a single currency to a multipolar world with several key currencies. The story of the dollar is far from over, and the next chapter is being written right now. So there you have it. The dollar's journey to the top wasn't an accident. It was a combination of historical circumstances like World War I destroying its rivals, strategic planning at Bretton Woods, and a master stroke of economic diplomacy with the creation of the petrodollar system. It's a story about gold, oil, and power. Today, its strength comes from the sheer size of the US economy, the depth of its financial markets, and its role as the world's ultimate safe haven. While challenges are emerging, the complex web that supports the dollar's reign is not easily untangled. Understanding this history is key to understanding how our global economy works today. What do you think the future holds for the dollar? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this interesting, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into how our world works. See you next time.